essential. It's really important, because if we are not talking about democracy right now, it means we are not talking about the future of this continent. And it means I'm not talking about my job, and I need my job. So we are moving into another very powerful section where we will be talking about shrinking civic space in West Africa, perspectives from stakeholders and development partners. Here we have a whole lot of our colleagues from diverse sectors that will be talking about this. Unfortunately, the ECOWAS team could not make it because they have to respond to some of the new developments around Niger. So we received the information quite late, and efforts to get someone from the commission to actually speak on behalf of ECOWAS also proved, abortive. But I'm happy that Dr. Remi is here. He's no longer in ECOWAS, but he's still ECOWAS. So I'm excited that he's also going to be the moderator, the chair of this particular section. So, Mr. Chair, I would invite you to the stage right now. Dr. Remi Ajibewa, an independent consultant and the former director of Political Affairs Directorate of the ECOWAS Commission. And it's a pleasure to bring on board my lecturer, Professor Charles Ukeje, an international relations expert and lecturer at the Obafemi Awolowo University, Nigeria. A little bit about him. He taught me, I think, International Relations 101 in 2000. So I'm sure he's happy that he's seen the fruits of his labor 23 years ago. And then we have Mr. Charles Abani, who is the United Nations resident coordinator in Ghana. He will be joining the panel via Zoom like he did yesterday. Miss Amina Salihu from the MacArthur Foundation is also on this panel. And we have Mr. Alba Ruben, who is the acting head of cooperation, European Union Delegation in Nigeria, who will also be joining us online. And finally, we have Ambassador William Awinador-Kanyirige, who is the senior advisor for governance and peacebuilding, African Union, will also be on this panel. So you can see that this is one of the most powerful panel for this event. So we'll take just... Okay, you, Prof. I graduated her. Would you like to get tea and coffee? I think we're fine. I don't need tea actually, but we can't start until they're back, is what I mean, right? I'll just do it. So the other speakers are actually joining online. That's Charles Abani and the EU. So I think we're fine. Okay. We'll have the chance to go over the comments and questions. And if time permits us, we'll invite one or two people to also intervene at some points during the panel. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, I think we now have a complete panel, and the EU representative is also online already. So, Mr. Chair, over to you.
Thank you. I want to use this opportunity to thank the organizers, WASI, Wademos, as well as the Ford Foundation, for the opportunity inviting me, as well as the other participants. It's well timely, and the topics we could see is very germane. I will do justice just introducing our members of panel here. We have the first person, Professor Charles Ukeje, sitting on my left. I've known Professor Charles Ukeje over the last 40 years in various settings while I was lecturing in lle-lfe. Then we've had cause to engage him at ECOWAS on some projects. But his area of specialization has been on Niger Delta, West Africa on the issue of regional security issues and maritime. And he has also served as resource person on major academic programs, served as at Institute of Peace and Security Studies, IPSS, in the University of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And he has been a recipient of many awards, including the Fulbright, as well as that of the Royal African Society, and been a lecturer of African politics and development at Oxford University. And he's also been engaged with many of the, whether I could see, with most of the civil society as well. Then we have Dr. Amina Salihu here. I have known also Madam for the last 3 decades. One in 3 dimensions, lecturer while he was at Abu Political Science Department, ABU. Then also he has served as a coordinator, Coalition for Change, which was sponsored by Dept. Then we've also had cause to work together in CDD. He was in Nigeria while I was in UK office then. Also, one area that he has not informed us, which I'm particularly interested. Yesterday, I thought he would use the opportunity. He's been involved with a program we call the School of Politics, Policy and Governance. It's a way of mentoring. We realize in Nigeria, quite a lot of us that should have even been politics and academia, where we ran away from real politics because of the other things. However, this is like putting the younger ones on a conventional school with a mission to educate them so that they will be able to speak, just like what they used to do in Oxford, just to make you an orator, to make you look for good, that you come to serve, not to steal. So she has been involved like a steward. She's been involved in that, and then also served under lle-Rufai when he was the minister of FCT. And then there's been other areas. He's also been involved in many university programs at Cape Town, Sussex, and Liverpool, and advisor to many governments as well as many private sectors. And she's an expert on gender, equity and inclusion. Then we have Mr. Alba Ruben. He's the acting head of corporation, is online, and head of section on democracy and good governance, also in charge of migration at the EU delegation to Nigeria and ECOWAS. The EU has been involved in many programs in which he has participated in, both in Taraba as well as Adamawa State, involving the refugees as well as the displaced people. Then we have my brother, Ambassador Awinador-Kanyirige, who was introduced yesterday, but I will add another dimension. I've also known him as far back as 2004, while he was the chief of staff to my boss then, Dr. Chambers, Ibn Chambers. Then I could also use this opportunity to say he was part of the group that allowed civil society to triumph, because, you know, civil society, WACSOF, and WANEP and others, we believe that at ECOWAS, while I was there when I joined, that the head of state will not be able to open some Pandora box, given my experience in CDD, that why not allow the civil society to do some work? And then thanks Dr. Chambers and himself and others, they allowed it to triumph. And that's why you see WANEP being a very strong partner. And you've had the history of WACSOF yesterday. We don't have to go into it. WACSOF disappointed, but we have to work with WASI. We work with West African Media Foundation and others like that. So it's also part of it. And I will also second the last speaker, His Excellency Charles Abani, was introduced yesterday, and we all saw it. Now to go to the main question of today: shrinking civil space in West Africa, perspective from stakeholders and development partners. This entirely says division of labor. That is, each and every one of us, whether the civil society, whether the traditional rulers, whether the international organizations, whether development partners, we have a role to play. We have to support this critical development that we are witnessing in the region. And against that background, we've already had discussion on the reversal of democratic dividend. We are now moving into the practical side of it. One of the speakers who will have been here, Dr. Abdel-Fatau Musah, is not here, but I will be able to fill some of the gap. Also, Dr. Awinador, because we've all worked together. Yes, Ambassador Awinador. Yes. So given that, let's start with the EU. Can we go? Or if not, so that the line will not be. So, Mr. Alba, Ruben, yes.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Good morning.
Yes, we can see you.
Good morning, and thank you so much for the invitation, for the opportunity to be virtually with you this morning. Unfortunately, I couldn't travel to Lagos to be with you. Thank you for the brief presentation. It is my great pleasure to be part of this panel to represent the EU. As you know, the European Union has been a long-standing partner and supporter of civil society across the region and beyond. And this is because we believe that civil society is one of our key stakeholders because they play a role in the development of any society. In fact, any country, any society that is vibrant, that wants to develop and that gives an opportunity for its citizens to participate actively in life has the civil society that we need to, we believe that we need to support. Can you hear me well? I hear some noise, some background noise. Can you follow me well?
We follow you.
Very good. So in fact, as I said, for us, civil society play a very important role in the development of any country, of any society, and that's why we also believe that civil society must be supported, so we continue strengthening its role vis-a-vis the governments, but also as the catalyzers for the wishes of the population, of the citizens at large. You know much better than I do how the dynamics of civil society in space in West Africa have evolved, and I would say since the early 80s, we've seen also a growing trend towards democracy that unfortunately it seems to be going the other way around recently. I just woke up this morning with the news coming from Gabon, not so far from the region, but you have also definitely followed the latest trend of coup d'etats taking place in the region. And I think that again, I think for us it's important to remind the role of civil society as part of a healthy and a vibrant democracy that allows citizens also to express their grievances, their concerns, and their ideas to make sure that the development can flourish. So as part of this evolution, I would say that the European Union has been accompanying and has been supporting from the very beginning civil society in West Africa. And I know that, of course, you know, what we do is not always enough, that issues such as the lack of funds, the lack of capacity, the exclusion in political processes has also weakened the role of civil society in many countries. And I think that's also part of I would say it's part of the instability that we see also in some countries. So what we try to do is basically try to address some of those challenges by investing in actions that address those issues. I don't have the figures, but we're talking about 700 million euros since the 80s. And we are in fact now, and this is what I wanted to share with you, we are now in fact finalizing a new program that will support civil society networks in the region and beyond. So we're looking at Sub-Saharan, so an action for the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa, trying to promote democratic governance, equality, the rule of law, and the respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. And this by improving and the engagement and the inclusive participations of African citizens. So this is a new action that will have a budget of 30 million euro, and that will support existing networks. Sorry, it's a 10 million euro to start with. I said 30, but I was referring to the previous one. So for now, we have a new 10 million euro contribution. And as I said, this action will support already stakeholders and networks of civil society organizations in the region to help them play a more active role in regional dialogues and also try to influence both regional and national policies. These are the issues that we're looking at, issues such as electoral processes. So the involvement, critical role of civil society as a watchdog in terms of electoral processes, conflict prevention, and the management and the participation in governance processes to promote transparency, inclusivity, and accountability. That includes also actions that could support more transparency in how the funds, the budget funds, are being used at all levels of government. So we are also looking at other specific important issues such as the drug demand reduction in West Africa. So we'll be working with the network based in Ghana that is helping to fight also the drug abuse, the drug use in the region that has also grown exponentially in the last few years, similarly to a trend, a global trend that is also happening in other places. I think it's also for us important that we address these issues because it's really affecting young people in the continent and in the region. And we are also looking at helping and provide opportunities for other networks at the regional economic community level, but also at continental level to address equal participation and leadership. So, as I said, for us, the civil society organizations definitely have to have a role in dialogue with the authorities, in policy making, because they bring expertise from the ground. They represent the needs and the wishes of the people, of the citizens. And I think there is no way we can be talking about the Agenda 2030 or leaving no one behind if we don't work with the civil society actors. We definitely believe that there can be no accountability, and also they can, we need to improve the access to information, and we cannot do that also without working with civil society organizations. And I think that's why we really, at the European Union, we believe that this investment needs to happen. Now, we see this as complementary to what the national government should be doing. I mentioned 10 million, it may seem a lot, but it's definitely not enough for all of the needs and for all of the actions that need to take place. And this, of course, also in a space, in a context where we see, unfortunately, that in some countries there is a shrinking of civic space. There is some, as I mentioned, some democratic backsliding, and there is increasingly more threats for civil society organizations, for human rights defenders to do their work. So that's what I would like to share with you to start with, also to let other participants to add to the discussions, and I'll be happy to maybe join later if there are any questions or doubts. Thank you.
Of 7 minutes each. I will now call on Madam Amina Salihu. You help us to look at, we often look at the issue of democracy, looking at development, but democracy itself is an intrinsic good, but it's not enough without development. And that's those days, people often look at it that development without democracy is also a problem. Nevertheless, there's also tension between the civil society itself. I remember during the Nigeria election, there were a lot of things I had to do my intervention there. So between the civil society as well, there's competition. It should not be competition, it should be solidarity and cooperation, coordination, and then division of labor. However, even within the community itself, as well as the AU, ECOWAS, and the REX. So what are we learning at the intersection of democracy and development? You can help us look at it because you are from Ford Foundation, no, not Ford Foundation, MacArthur. Then Ford Foundation is also here, later they will ask. So what is it the juicy areas you are looking at times before you sponsor? Because the EU as well, we always, they have a juicy area that they tell you, look for conflict prevention, mediation. And the mediation at times, we don't even, the AU, UN, ECOWAS, they don't use the money because the conditionalities are different from what operates. You can just say, I will head of state go in an economy because that's what you put there. So those are practical aspects. That's why the money. So can you tell us about the learning and the nexus and the intersections of this? Thank you. 7 minutes, please, madam.
Thank you. Oh, I have one. All right. I thought I needed to use your mic. Many thanks indeed, Chair and Moderator, and thank you for this opportunity. So I sit at the Africa office of the MacArthur Foundation. And let me be quick to say that the MacArthur Foundation is not leaving Africa. People have asked me this question, but we're rethinking the present program, which by 2024 would have run for about 10 years. And it is something that we call a big bet. A big bet is a MacArthur Foundation way of saying that there are certain issues that are a very big challenge, but without tackling those issues, you're not going to get anywhere. You can't address all the other nice to-dos. So a big bet is a need to do, not a nice to do. And I think I needed to share this preface because the context to respond to the question that our dear moderator has asked me comes from that perspective. And apparently I'm talking about donor perspective or development partner perspective in this sense, and to also share some of the things that we're learning. And I think you heard from our colleague from the EU who, in very clear terms, situated the importance of civil society to the development space. That is not in contention. But there are certain things we're learning about the dynamics of the space called the civic space and the dynamics of the relationship between that space and the non-civic space. And that's where I want to focus my first 7 minutes. Development and democracy go hand in hand. They matter. Democracy in itself, is an important good because the ability to have voice and agency and be able to push back at power should not be taken lightly. And we've heard all the history in this room. So protecting that is very important. And the MacArthur Foundation recognizes that. However, sometimes we have forgotten that a civil rule is not the same as a democratic rule. And so the work continues. How do you ensure that that civilian administration, which is only the input, the start, translates into that agency and a safe space for the people for whom it should be about? And Chichi asked a very fundamental question earlier about what do we do post-elections? Now, in order to ensure that that civil space transforms itself into a proper democratic space, respect for the rule of law is very important. The Constitution is not just paper, it has to deliver the fact that nobody is above the law. And we have to ensure that systems and processes work to determine that. Agenda setting is also very important. You don't just do the elections and say, oh, well, our part is done, and you go back and sit down. There are some change champions in government who need the support of civil society to continue to have that interaction. And sometimes they look behind them and they don't have their backs. Sometimes civil society itself is getting burnt out because there's so much to do and there's so little time and other resources to do it in. So on the side of democracy, therefore, you need to strengthen all of those pillars, you know, the systems, the infrastructure, the structures themselves, the voices. But then it is not just enough to have the laws. Laws are necessary but insufficient for the change we seek. We must then begin to ask ourselves, how are those laws translating into better life for the people that we want to affect? And my Africa Director, Koli Shetima, would always say, look, whether we spend $100 or we spend 100 million, at the end of the day, we must be able to ask ourselves, how has our last dollar or naira changed the lives of the poorest of the poor for the better? Whether we're civil society or we're government or we're development partner, if we're not able to create the intersection of democracy as an opportunity to have voice and agency, and development as an opportunity for realization of the aspirations of people and their livelihood and their dignity, we would always have tensions that are unresolvable. And so realizing this particular challenge, which, by the way, always comes to development partners, and I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say that whatever becomes the policy is never something that comes, in the case of MacArthur from Chicago, it is something that we learn from the space in which we're working. It is learning that emerges from what you, some of the colleagues in this room, are telling us matters the most. Now, back to the need to do versus the nice to do that I started with earlier. MacArthur Foundation right now is tackling anti-corruption work in Africa, focused on Nigeria with some grant making in Ghana. But we're realizing that in order for you to tackle corruption, you not only strengthen civil society voices, you also cannot assume that government is bad and government is irredeemable. Because however strong civil society is, it cannot usurp the role of government. However well-meaning a government is, it cannot usurp the role of civil society. So that collaboration becomes non-negotiable. And how do you collaborate? We have what we call the sandwich theory. The sandwich theory, just like, you know, a sandwich that some of us had for tea earlier, you have an upper layer, it could be civil society or government, then you have a second layer of the bread, it could again be civil society or government, but it has to be either of the two. But in between, to make that sandwich palatable to eat, there has to be some nice things, like trust building, like collaboration, like voice, like capacity enhancement. Because without building trust, we can't go far. We need each other. This is what we are learning. And sometimes we assume that it's only civil society that can expand the space. We do not think so. And I give an example of two leaders, two governments. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf when she was president, and Joyce Banda when she was president, each of Liberia and of Malawi. And they connected the market women in both of their countries to meet each other and to work together. I can see my sister Nana nodding because she remembers. That is government connecting civil society. So before we begin to think about confrontation, maybe we need to understand the lay of the land first. And we're finding that sometimes some of us give the benefit of the doubt to government. Sometimes some of us don't give enough benefit of the doubt to government. And you know, the mark of a good general is not the size of their arsenal. It's knowing when to deploy a particular tool. So if we better understand government 101, and I've been to convenings where sometimes we have not even seen the policies we have fought for. We have not even read the laws that we have fought for. We have not asked to do an evaluation of what that law is like. So there's work to be done in terms of the relationship between government and civil society, but there's also work to be done in terms of the intra-tensions within civil society. There are intra-tensions. Intra-tensions because the civic space itself is not homogeneous, it is heterogeneous. And that is why, as we're thinking about whether it's shrinking, whether it's diminishing, whether it's closing, we also need to think about the fact that it is changing. And some voices are better heard than other voices. The role of technology was mentioned in the last panel, so I'm not going to go into that. But it's important to see how that is even changing the nature of civil society and what new opportunities there are in terms of the way we are organizing. The intergenerational tensions. We had an NSAS convening where young people said they didn't want to see anybody of my kind of generation because they felt we had failed them. That's the civic space. So in order for us to be better organized, to engage with government, we also have to determine and understand the tensions within the civic space and address them. In some of our organizations, the members of our team don't even know what is in the budget. Only the CEO knows the budget. And you're talking about values, you're talking about expanding the space. But where is the space expansion? Where are the values in the organization? And so for us at the MacArthur Foundation, we're looking at communication as two kinds. The external communication that happens between civil society and non-civil society spaces, and the kind of communications that happen within civil society spaces, because we think the two are very important. And of course, the collaboration that then happens between the two of them. And I know that there's a panel later that's going to be talking about the kind of funding that we have enabled, but I'm just going to close by saying that one final learning that I want to put on the table is that we recognize that this work is hard. This work is unending. There's never going to be enough resources. All of the development partners of the world will not change our continent. We will change it ourselves. But as we're doing that, we're learning that it's very important for development partners to put money in the collaborations that we're asking colleagues to have. So some of convening such as this should be well funded, like has taken the lead on this, but also the mental health of people who do this work matters. A lot of the time we're always giving, we're always going, we're always doing. The need to pause and reflect, the need to set agenda, not just setting agenda for government, but for ourselves will become very important as we enable a greater space for gender, for equity, and for social inclusion. I rest my case here for now, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Salihu. You've already expressed the thought along with practical experience. I think you've already discussed that civil rule is not democratic control, and there's a need to have agenda setting where the problem is even the difficult area. The AU can speak later. The issue of agenda setting is a very big problem for most of our CSOs as well as even the Rex. Because you tend to set the agenda, just like now, I know the people in ECOWAS, they've already been looking towards there, but now there will be a different plan as well. There's work to be done between the CSOs, you rightly said, it's not a matter of competition. They just like I used to say, the air is too big, that the planes are even not colliding. So who are we on the field not to create a niche area for yourself? And you also talk indirectly on the need for accountability and credibility, which some of us said, those are the things we uphold while we were in CDD London that made us to have access to some of the grants from Ford Foundation, MacArthur, and the so in the world. So you've rightly said it. This is an area we can tell ourselves the truth, because this session, as rightly pointed, is an area where we have the knowledge, people, the policy, as well as the implementation and what do we need, which you've rightly said. So I think in the comment as well as the questions, there will be more to be done. Next in line is Ambassador William Awinador. I think my question, given your background, your orientation, I want to ask some things that revolve around knowledge, policy, and implementation. How do the continental organizations or the RECs, how do they involve the CSOs? Given that you said you have Agenda 2063, you also said there's division of labor, which we all know that there's area for the continental organization, and you call the RECs your building blocks. And then you also said, when the regs also look at, it comes to the member states, and the member states are the civil society itself. And recalling those days, we know that AU, Continental Organization, ECOWAS, other regs, they don't want to open the Pandora box. And it is these CSOs that can help. And the international partners are also guilty. When they are giving the money again, the EU is readdressing that. They will give it at times to the regional and the AU, forgetting the CSO that are much more familiar with the people. The same thing with ECOWAS. ECOWAS, from the ECOWAS of state to the ECOWAS of people. How are these things getting to the people? Because we know AU and ECOWAS, they operate on state level, member states. So it's a deep reflection. So what do you think that you can do? What are some of your programs that you have been assisting the CSO with? And where do you think you can still improve upon? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me say at the very outset that I speak as a sole public servant. What do I mean by that? A civil society public servant. My first working experience was actually with the International Young Christian Students Movement, when in 1982 we set up the Africa Regional Office in Nairobi. So I have this bag in me that I carry along. And so I'm speaking as William Awinador-Kanyirige and not as a representative of the AU. That gives me latitude to go from north to south, east to west, without bringing in the AU. Do I have your permission to proceed as such? Thank you very much. And taking it from the last part, the very pertinent point you raised about support for ECOWAS, AU, and those CSOs that are on the ground and impacting don't really feel that support. I recall as ambassador here in Abuja, the then EU ambassador was getting frustrated with the problem of funding coming down to the local level. And I was asking, what should they do? And I said, send it direct to the CSOs. I mean, it's as simple as that. Particularly in the case of ECOWAS, where the citizens of West Africa are already funding the organization through the community level. And yet, when it comes to policy making, decision making, the citizens seem to be absent. Now, as to whether we are creating the space for CSOs, for me, the challenge is, as my sister mentioned earlier, and I said yesterday that shrinking space for CSO is a faux problem, as the French say. It's a false problem. The challenge is with the CSOs taking advantage of the opportunities, working, as sister said, in solidarity, not in competition, because as investment centers of of Africa said in Zimbabwe in 1995 at their Africa meeting, that they all compete for investments. And they coined this word, co-opetition, cooperation in competition. That's what CSOs should be looking at. How do you cooperate in the competition of getting resources and impacting? And Waxy, you have your work cut out. And Wademos also, not only operating at the regional level, but immediately between West Africa and Central Africa, because UN has tried to create that dynamic, you recall, between ECAS and ECOWAS with the support of UNOCA in Libreville and UNOWAS in the Dakar, and so forth. But let me say at the very outset this, that there has been a trend in West Africa in terms of CSO space. And you need to look at it pre-2002 and post-2002. Pre-2002, when Africa had gained independence and we had socialist states, military dictatorships and whatnot, we had challenges of civic space. But with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of apartheid, what became clear in Africa was that post-apartheid, Africans were going to look inwards and hold their leaders to account more. And CSOs actually began to do that. And they got the push with this AU, APRM, and NEPAD, mechanisms. And so in Yamoussoukro in 2002, our West African leaders gave the mandate to ECOWAS, or at that time, executive source. The public sector, just as it does to the private sector, does not understand the climate of CSOs and does not appreciate the climate of our small-scale industries, women in business and all that. And therefore, you need to do something to bring them up to speed, not just doing that from outside, but also doing it from within. And so you expect that individuals here should be trying to enter. I don't want to use the word infiltrate, get recruited into our REX, ECOWAS, African Union, and try to impact from within. And we have a number of them who have done that. Takwa Abu was in one, very effective, and is now with the UN. And there are other misfortunes of some of the colleagues in the CSOs who have come in, but it was explained yesterday. Yeah, some of them are already set up individually to use the CSO platform for their own political agenda. And I had, my brother Remi doesn't want to mention it, so the person will remain unnamed, who was boasting to us that he was going to become president of his country. And I responded that you are not material for president of your country. And he said, I should wait and see. And I said, let me promise you one thing. The day I hear you are president of your country, I'll take 1 battalion from Accra and come and overthrow you in your own interest. By the way, I'm not a supporter of coup d'etat, but let me put that caveat. Fast forward, the guy became a minister. And I met him at the Holiday Inn with a Ghanaian businessman. And he said, you see, William, I'm on the way. I said, I'm also waiting. I'm sure some of you are recognizing the character concern. Eventually, he ran into trouble. But he hasn't given up, by the way. So you have those cases, but that should not discourage us, Ahmed, moving forward. Synergy with ECOWAS, the commission, which is the right department. We had our sister Rehimat, may her soul rest in peace. Dynamic. Oh my God. She's gone and things have slowed down. Why should it be so? Why should it be so? You have ECOWAS Parliament. That is the traditional ally of CSOs because they say they represent the citizens. CSOs represent the citizens. But there's a disconnect. In fact, some of the parliamentarians say, are you CSOs? What is your legitimacy? We are elected. Now, as we speak, you have an ECOWAS parliament. They come to ECOWAS meetings. What happens after the meetings in the national parliaments coming out of the ECOWAS parliament? What happens in terms of their constituencies? And imagine the amount of money we spend on those institutions. ECOWAS Court of Justice. The person that I know who has been very engaged is our brother Femi Falana, almost like a one-man show with the ECOWAS Court of Justice in terms of what they are doing. Decisions are passed at the Court of Justice. How many are being respected by the member states? I don't want to go into details of what happened at the inception of the court, but what is the value for money and what is the role of CSOs moving forward? Because of time, have I done 5 minutes? A minute left, okay. So a minute left. So let me conclude quickly by saying that some of the things that we need to do includes working with the state actors, REX and AU, for us to prioritize, number one, the education content and pedagogy in our member states. I was here when current president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, then chairman of his party, at a book launch of President Buhari, was appealing to the government to make sure that the teaching of history and our cultural heritage was brought back into our schools. In Ghana, the situation was not different. So I reached out to the president of the Historical Association of Nigeria through our friend, Professor Albert Isaac, And he said, oh, Ambassador, don't worry. In the case of Nigeria, we have started the process. How can we take for granted the history and the heritage of Africa? There is a former interpreter of Mozambique to President Chisano. He's written a book on SADC. And the beginning of that book is talking about pre-colonial Southern Africa and the kind of integration processes that were going on. That's the only type of book I've seen on the continent. I haven't seen anything like that for ECOWAS, East Africa, or North Africa, where our integration must start pre-colonial so that we don't operate neo-colonial, non-inclusive integration as is currently the case. There is a book that I also bought in New York, West Africa, Medieval West Africa, from the perspective of Muslim scholars and traders. It's not a thick book. I would recommend you to read it. And you see the richness of the integration process. Even in the medieval era, the level of statecraft diplomacy between the Kingdom of Morocco, Mali, Ghana empires, free movement that were exchanged in the medieval era, when other parts were still okay. So why won't West Africa look at the trans-Saharan trade and the kind of integration that took place, whereby, for instance, Hausa is a major language in Ghana? It was through the trans-Saharan trade, later enhanced by other developments. You see different kingdoms. Moshi Kingdom in Burkina Faso, a princess from Ghana moved there, married a Burkinabe, their son Ouedraogo created the Moshi Kingdom, to the point that the Moshis referred to northern Ghanaians as their grandparents. A princess from Ghana moved to Cote d'Ivoire, established the Baole Kingdom. The houses in Niger, houses in Nigeria, look at it, and it's all across board. That is the beginning of our integration. I was traveling from Ghana to Benin, and I saw that some people were not being checked. They were just going across the border. So when I was coming back with an ordinary passport, I said, let me try and see if I'll be stopped. So I followed them, and then the immigration guy stopped me. I said, why are you stopping me? Don't you see that Addis? He said, yes, I know them. So there's a different level of integration from this official one where we as public servants are frustrating integration. My hobby in ECOWAS days was to go from Abuja by air to Lagos, drive by road. And I didn't have to get down from my car. The driver would take my passport, go through customs and immigration until I got to my destination. Meanwhile, I'm seeing our market women frustrated, abused sometimes. And we say we are doing free movement for some people, for the elite. CSOs, where are we? This is untenable. I was in Paris. I drive from Paris to Berlin and seamless. This cannot continue. CSOs must do something. So the 1 minute is up. Let me not get emotional and longer than it is. And thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Can we give a yes? I think I don't need to. Yes, you've spoken that what kind of synergy to create among the CSO as well as the REX. And you also mentioned about the disconnect between ECOWAS, Parliament, and the CSOs as well as their national. But you gave us some food for thought on reflections there, which I've also discussed with some participants here on this issue of knowledge. You did mention about the pre-colonial Southern Africa integration, the Musah of those times. History is good. In fact, I discussed with 3 or 4 people yesterday and this morning about the issue of South Africa, that it's very sympathetic, that not much has been written on what role Nigeria, Ghana in particular played. That as far back as 78, I know myself, and I was in federal school A levels, we were asked to deduct some money. And then those that are serving, they deduct certain like tax from their money And not only that, some of them went to school, A-levels, Federal School of Arts and Science, Ondo, with me, who are now ministers. Not only that, Tambo and Becky was there, and many of them. But however, I got surprised when they were informing me that many people intellectuals are even denied visa, that visa of South Africa is one of the difficult things to get now, which should not be, but I've taken it up with MFA and I've taken it with Bolaji Akinyemi and others. It's very unfair. With little of my age, I'm 64, but I knew what role we did. I was a practitioner, but a diplomat of 52 was telling me that, Oga, you had this experience we never knew. That's from my ministry, an ambassador somewhere in Europe now. We were in the plane. So the issue of knowledge, that's why even in ECOWAS now, we created knowledge by MFD, Mediation and Facilitation Division, because most of these mediations we also did were not written. I will tell you, I'm also involved because we are short staff. I was the only one then. You know, when I joined, following General Abubakar, following this back to back, no time to write. So there's a need to bring back the history. You are right, Albert, Isaac Albert was championing it. I learned history is coming back now, but it's never, I don't know whether it started. Yeah, Charles will tell us that later. Yes, but I'm not sure whether. So you are right. I'm also being, when I heard of it, I felt bad as if, why is this xenophobia and all these things? As if, yeah, these countries, So they call them frontline state. They call Nigeria frontline state. Frontline state. And then, okay, we move to the next speaker, which is Abani, 12. Yeah. My brother will speak now. I don't need to go into the epistemology of the background or orientation or experience, but it's well known to us and a brother and a friend. Please, can you tell us, my brother, you did mention it yesterday, that we are all guilty. Both the CSO, ECOWAS has failed, the AU has failed, the UN has failed. Where are we now? And what do you think can be done? And what areas have the UN been doing to ensure that they readdress the situation? What do we then do differently? How do COSO remain influential and even the UN remain influential? And as you said, ECOWAS is in crisis all the way to the UN, and there's a need for collaboration. And we have seen the issue that we've been discussing here revolve around the issue of collaboration as well. Collaboration, cooperation, and how has it been with UN there, with the AU, with the ECOWAS, and then the civil society? And where do you think we can go from there so that what reflection that comes from you with your practical experience will be what the next speaker will now talk on, being coming from academia to say, because academia at times when they don't enter into the policy zone, they try to believe that certain things can be done. So now, yes. So you, ECOWAS, I will come to ECOWAS area later, speaks on that. He didn't want to go into AU, but he mentioned some ramification there. But my brother, as a development partner, I want you to revolve. This is our continent. How can we move forward with this shrinking space and then the reversal of the democratic dividend? We have to let the people know, our leaders as well. Okay, my brother, you can fire on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I hope you can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me clearly. So thank you very much. And let me build on my comments yesterday first in terms of the reflection. I certainly feel that we all agree that civic space is shrinking, and development partners have an important role to play in, I guess, bolstering that shrinking space, definitely. And I think that it's fair to say that this is acknowledged certainly in principle across the board. The key issues are around practice and enabling this. And perhaps because I work with the UN, a reference to SDG 17 is probably the starting point for me. SDG 17 talks about partnership, and we recognize the importance of partnership across principally three sectors, government, private sector, and civil society as essential ingredients to enable this to happen. And obviously for us in Ghana, we have a cooperation framework which sets out our expectations on this and have clearly indicated that we want to move from a very traditional approach of seeing civil society not as the accountability partner of government and indeed the UN as well, to one where we're actually, if you like, strengthening and having a strategic relationship that goes beyond, if you like, very instrumentalist use of civil society to deliver pieces of work. And so good examples of this are some of the analytical work that is taking place with credible actors such as CDD here in Ghana, who are working on a number of difficult issues. Also to very community-based engagements, for example, in northern Ghana on the borders with Burkina Faso, where community groups are actively being engaged in working to address some of the issues that are creating push factors and forced migration across borders. So I think certainly there's a stated intent within the UN system and certainly among the broader development partners here in Ghana that working with civil society is important for accountability primarily, but also for reaching and providing information around if you like, things in spaces where government does not have reach. Is that space impacted negatively? I think it is. And I'd probably list out kind of 4 key issues that I think have come to the fore. The first is what I call kind of sovereignty-related issues. There's a strong sense among nation states in Africa, and I think we've seen this most notably in the past few weeks and including yesterday, around, if you like, policy sovereignty and the space that the state wants to create for itself to actually determine its future direction. This certainly is one of the areas that has shrunk the space for civil society actors. As states assert a stronger policy direction role within governments and seek to, if you like, enforce that policy direction without necessarily providing much accountability. Recently, we had a political economy update here in Ghana with commentators from Imani, from WAXI, from CDD, and others, where clearly this issue is seen as a major constraining factor. And the government itself is resistant to the idea of accountability to citizens. And so while there are vast numbers of huge flagship projects, there is very little accountability and very little involvement of civil society in providing for that accountability. I think the second constrainer clearly is Ghana's own status as initially as a lower middle income country. This has also led to a number of donors refashioning their programs into more economic programs rather than governance and strengthening programs. And so while we've seen a rise in the transaction rate around business to business operations, we've seen a significant reduction in the amount of resources available, except for a few donors or development partners available for civil society. And so this constraint is exacerbated, of course, because Ghana itself is facing macroeconomic challenges, and this means that there are less resources to provide monitoring. The third factor is obviously the nature of the kind of engagement civil society has had. For example, there has been a lot of focus on project delivery rather than on institutional capability to do analysis and to be able to provide this. And I know that even the best of the CSOs out here, the Imanis, the CDDs, the Star Ghanas, this work of this world, and some of the women's groups are increasingly facing resource constraints to them. Other areas, and this impinges upon the sovereignty point, is around human rights. We have seen a sort of a low tolerance level for engagement around human rights issues. As you will all be aware, Ghana also has an impending bill on sexual and gender minority rights, which has been the subject of great difference of opinion over the last 18 months and continues to be highly contentious. And indeed, while civil society did participate in the recent Universal Periodic Review, the degree to which they have been taken seriously in terms of the recommendations is kind of mixed. And so while civic organizations are trying to respond to this, faced with resource constraints, there is a lot of sovereignty-based, we will determine what our rights in our own country context, and therefore UN definitions, Western definitions are not acceptable. I think a third place is in the media, and we've also worked with our colleagues Sulemana and co here in Ghana, talking about the rise of hate speech, the polarization of civil society around some of these issues, and the media itself facing a number of constraints. Ghana has recently dropped its ranking in terms of media freedom from an enviable position, I think, of second on the continent to somewhere around 50, 60. Sulemana can confirm that exact figure. So, and with elections due next year, we can anticipate that perhaps freedom of journalists, freedom of expression may be issues that will need to be certainly kept on the watch. And having organizations like Media Foundation of West Africa and others to be able to robustly challenge freedom of speech and ensuring safety of journalists, this will be an area that we will be watching in the coming years. Having said that, I do think that, as I said yesterday, there are constraints of capacity and understanding even within the multilateral organizations, ECOWAS, the African Union, and dare I say, even within the UN. The ability to understand what is strategic engagement, the ability to translate that into predictable, collaborations that endure, that are not projectized and one-off in nature or very consultative and extractive, is still a journey that multilateral organizations need to make. And I think this point was made by the last speaker, though I struggled somewhat to hear this. I think too that we have seen, certainly in many places, that civil society itself can become weaponized and instrumentalized around political processes, and itself weaponizes. And so there are spaces that have been captured by certain groups and others feel excluded. And so there is, if you like, a lot of work to be done to rebuild the trust within civil society. We did some work on this in Nigeria over the last few years through some of the pioneering work around networking and building strategies and tactics for engagement. And as I said yesterday, I think there is an importance to almost pause and reflect on what is this space we're describing. Do we actually have civic space in quite the way that we did before? With the rise of corporations and big philanthropic foundations who have a lot of influence, from whom, by the way, civil society also take large chunks of money, to what extent have they been marginalized, appropriated, captured within that framework? And increasingly, private sector organizations having a lot of influence. So I kind of think that it would be useful to really say, what does this space look like? What kind of collaborations do we need? Do we need to abandon some of the old cliche dogma that private sector is bad and everything to do with the private sector is bad? Or do we, as I think, need to actually forge strategic relationships and recognize that if we are to really influence, which is the purpose of what we're trying to do, then we must recognize and build more pragmatic relationships, particularly with private sector actors, in order to achieve that. So beyond reconceptualizing the space, we must also maybe reconceptualize, what does action mean? Does it mean the traditional kind of oppositional work that is being done? And again, it's increasingly on social media. Or does it mean actually reconfiguring and offering policy alternatives? And while I know there are a raft of organizations that do this, for the vast majority, opposition seems sufficient. And increasingly, as opposition moves onto social media, it has no tangible accountability mechanism with governments. People hear it, but don't necessarily act on it. And so what is influence? I guess influence should be the ability of civic organizations to actually make a government more accountable. And we need to be able to define whether opposition is actually resulting in influence, and get much better at defining that and understanding why and how that influence happened, and then acting in that way. And I would suggest that this is an area where civic organizations, as the landscape is shifting, as the political contestations globally, regionally, and in country begin to shift, that civil society needs to reconceptualize these three things: space, action, and influence. I said yesterday, and I will hold my ground, Mr. Moderator, that actually I don't have all the answers. And I think that part of the value of this important gathering is to begin to muse over these in the various different sessions that are run here. What kind of role do we need international organizations and multilaterals like the UN to play, and to push for that? So I certainly think a stronger push by civic organizations up and down, including through ECOWAS, the African Union, and the United Nations, to actually demand for a clearer set of strategic relationships with civil society will be important. I also think that we need to look again at what the ecosystem of action actually is. Who are the players? How do intergovernmental organizations work? And how do, if you like, what is the relationship that involves influence with the private sector and state actors as well? I think also that there is an intergenerational issue that I'm glad we're exploring through this, that must be looked at. How do young people engage? What is important to young people? And as civic actors, what are they engaged with? And to maybe challenge some of the traditional notions that exist within civil society, and recognize that civil society, like everywhere else, is made up of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and not just the good. And so these are my kind of thoughts. Certainly within the UN, there is a craving to do more with civil society, and to work better with civil society. I think that journey is not yet actualized, and there's a strong push for it. I think that development partners on the ground here, in my experience in Ghana, are increasingly looking to civil society around the core accountability questions that need to be answered, but in the context of dwindling resources facing the continent. So maybe I should stop here and just say that the next, I guess, 18 months, while Ghana goes through its election in the context of contestations around democracy, will be an important time for civil society to be very agile, awake, and try to have as much influence as possible in smarter ways in Ghana. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, my brother, yes, I don't say you have answers to it, but why I did mention, William is there, yourself is there, myself, we all went through Oga Chamba. They often say you've already explored all these things. What is your view? And he said it's left to you younger ones. Discuss. I met my sister yesterday. I said, Chambers send this from there, that the whole thing is left with you, civil society, to make sure that you resolve this Niger problem and others. So it's part of the discussion, as you rightly said, and that there is no fit-cut answer. But those issues that you rightly mentioned, like the human rights issues, have been the center of discussion, even at ECOWAS AU as well, where it's like where the government do not always want to open the Pandora box. And that's why later on, possibly if I'm given the chance, some of the things that ECOWAS does, which Dr. Musah will have mentioned, if I can be allowed to talk on that. You did mention quite a lot of things which I would not want to repeat, but the good issue you mentioned is the strategic engagement to predictable collaboration, which you've also addressed that towards the SDG 17. And I'm happy you gave some examples. Where I'm driving to is that ECOWAS, AU, UN should give examples where they have empowered our development partners, where they have empowered the CSOs to do this work. You've mentioned some areas. I'm happy the Media Foundation is here, which I've already witnessed some of the work. The CDD Ghana is also here, which mentioned. And on the part of ECOWAS as well, I mean, they've been engaging when we talk about the issue of electoral experts to support the member states undergoing transition. ECOWAS, as well as other, they do not stay alone looking for it internally. We look at the CDDs of this world, whether Ghana, Nigeria, and then we also look at I don't want to give names now. Some other organizations, they've also been filled. We've had them sent to most of what we call the fact-finding missions or assessment missions. Then also the election observation, which you know they are involved there. Those are some of the role of the civil society. But another one is this issue of tenure elongation as well. The civil society has played a role, but they should continue to play a role till that supplementary protocol get revived. And the commissioner is much more from the civil society background, and he's been saying leading to ECOSOC. Then there are some targeted programs as well, which ECOWAS has been engaged in the area of governance, rule of law, and transitional justice, working with CDD Nigeria on transitional justice, working on the rule of law and governance with, as well as media, with Lycia, as well with Media Foundation. My late brother, Okorodudu, is under that, and he worked extensively on that. And then he also brought in some area on the concern for constitutionalism and justice sector reform, which he said these are fundamental questions, given the fact that the state has already captured the legislatures and the judiciary arm. I don't want to go into that. We know that one. We've seen and against that background, ECOWAS initiated in 2021 what we call the Forum of Ministers of Justice, FOJA, they call it FOMOJ, Forum of Ministers of Justice, for them to look at harmonization. Then the early warning mechanism as well, the ECOWAS has been working with ONEF, even bringing all the other organizations to look at their policy issues as well. I think those are areas, as you rightly said, electoral circle is another area we need to look at. Basically, the civil society, voters registration, the campaigning as well. And you did mention something about even the civil societies, the credibility. I was in 2 countries, I will not mention, in Francophone. The coup is already happening in 1. In that country, we have 3 sets of civil society. People from that country, we have the one for government, we have the one for opposition, and we have the one for neutral. Guinea, in particular, if you want me. Then I had to call one office there. That was 2 years ago. Which of these are legitimate? They said it's the government that is causing all this problem, polarizing them. Three different, and we had to meet each of them, and we had their position. Yeah. So we need to see that, yes. So I think I'll round up to say that what we just need to do is to cooperate. We don't need, just like my late brother Tajo Abraham say, let's civil society, let's organize, don't let us agonize. Let us organize, don't let us agonize. Thank you. Charles.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to make just a couple of points just to conclude. One, I wanted to share quite an inspirational story coming out of Ghana. It's being done by the Africa Center for Economic Transformation Asset, and it's something called the Ghana Compact and the Ghana We Want. And so in the midst of, all of this, us talking about kind of how we're failing and how space is shrinking, actually there's some very, very exciting and important work being constructed. And we know that, globally there is all the talk about social contracts. Ghana is, and the work of Asset and a number of other parties, many of whom I'm sure even in that room, really trying to build a homegrown compact of the Ghana they want. I think is a very powerful example of how civil society can actually work effectively. And I think the second point I would like to make, and I think it's true of the work of CDD, of the work of Star Ghana, of the work of IDEG, Asset, is that the ability to actually reach actors in both government and civil society credibly has been a strong factor in their ability to have influence, and they undoubtedly do have that influence. And so as you kind of drill deeper into the strategies and tactics of what works and what doesn't work, and I think there's been some important work done on this in Nigeria over the years, it's really important to focus on what works and why has it worked, and use those strategies and tactics to be able to do stuff. Let me stop there.
Thank you. Yeah. Next.
Don't say anything. Just give me the microphone. Just don't say anything. Just let me have my 10 minutes.
Okay.
Good afternoon. If I stand between you and lunch, just hold him responsible, as well as Charles. Good morning, colleagues. Just as well, I tried to put down the things I wanted to say, so that it's probably going to be brisk. This morning on my alumni group, International Relations Alumni Association group, somebody had posted about the coup in Gambia, and my immediate reaction to the group in Gabon, who knows, it might just be a Freudian slip. I'm sorry, and I just replied, "Okweo," and I did the same thing with Rhoda too. Is there anyone in this room that felt that the situation in places like Gabon are normal? If you feel that the situation in Gabon or in Niger or in several different countries in West and Central Africa are normal, then you probably need a bit of examination. I worry that we live, and I'm trying to translate from Yoruba to English. There's a Yoruba saying that Ofi etesile onwo lapalapa. Ete is leprosy. So you leave the treatment of leprosy and then you begin to treat ringworm. And for me, ringworm is those things. They look like leprosy too, but they are not. This for me is probably what we have been doing. Not just in civil society, but, across our different countries, among different stakeholders. We have become so fixated with and investing time, resources, and energy in the forms and symbolisms of democracy. And somebody had said, you were the one that said it, that maybe it's really about multi-party civilian rule and less about democracy than with the content, substance, and meaningfulness of democracy. And so when things happen around us, we pretend as if we don't know that they were inevitable. But the reality that stares us, in our different countries is different. When the moderator started this morning, before he hijacked this session. He talked about division of labor. I agree completely that there's probably a time. There's no better time than now for that division of labor to happen. I worry that, and my contention is that how much fidelity are we maintaining, to that division of labor? Yes, we can accept that it is important for us to have division of labor between civil society, organized private sector, government, development partners, and so on and so forth. But how much fidelity are we maintaining to it? I believe that we can no longer continue, or we can't even afford to continue with dialogue of two devs, one in which we talk past one another. And we can see how some of the gaps in our interventions over the last 3 decades, are partly because we do not see ourselves as partners that are involved in division of labor, but as, competitors in that space, even within civil societies, as had been rightly mentioned earlier. So I said here that we cannot work in silos. Again, I see this, and I've had discussions talks around the kind of competition and rivalry and conflict, that take place even within the space, between and among civil society organizations themselves, between civil society and development partners, and between all of those and intergovernmental institutions. I worry that if we do not transcend this kind of narratives about, this kind of narratives, we may never be able to coalesce, to be able to do anything meaningful and sustainable, for our societies. So for me, some of the things I think are important that moving forward we should begin to reflect on is, for instance, to move beyond the rhetorics, around inclusivity, to one that actually pursues inclusivity, in its very essence. I see here, for instance, the importance of, the role of women organizations, role of youth organizations, and so on and so forth. About 3 years ago, I led a study that was mandated by the Peace and Security Council of the African Union on the role and contributions of youth to peace and security in Africa. And we did a whole lot of conversation across the continent, in the different regions. And what is coming clear to me is that we seem to have perfected the rhetorics of inclusivity. But when it comes to the substance of inclusivity, we miss by a very wide margin. So for me, therefore, I believe that my interest in the conversation around shrinking of the space is really for me to reflect about 1, 2, 3 opportunities, and I'll just mention them. And I heard Chichi loud and clear, was it today or yesterday, in the earlier panel, where she talked about what partners like Fund Foundation should in fact be doing. I would say straight off that the opportunity cost of civil society inaction or paralysis is far worse than anything that we can imagine. So I don't think that we should fret that we are not engaging enough or that we're not putting enough resources in the hands of civil society. What I see is that if we had ignored the kind of investment that have been made over the last 30 years in civil society, we'll probably have a worse space, civil society space, than we have today. So I believe that, this is important. The question of funding, I believe that funding is necessary, but not sufficient. I would like to see greater synergy between development partners and CSO coalitions to co-think, to co-create, and to co-implement initiatives that help to reinflate democracy, or at least put a wedge to the kind of slide that we're witnessing today. I don't think that it's sufficient for development partners, for instance, to say, this is how much we're putting down. Okay. But we need to have honest conversation across, the different partnerships within the space, about what in fact should be the priority before development partners begin to deploy whatever resources they'd like to deploy. When CSOs are left to themselves, they lose the capacity to exercise the kind of leverage necessary to call governments to order and to hold governments and public institutions accountable. Again, here, I would like to see that this capacity to exercise leverage okay, is not lost on CSOs. And that requires, again, working actively with development partners, and intergovernmental institutions. I recognize that technology has a role to play. And you had said that earlier, in terms of networking and in terms of mobilization across time and space. I believe that investing in civil society networks and coalitions have assumed greater importance, greater salience and urgency today than any time in the past. Putting your money in supporting coalitions, not just in specific countries, but in several different countries across the region, have grown in importance today than any time in the past. I believe that the state is losing a monopoly. And it's not just a monopoly of instruments of violence, but even monopoly in terms of knowledge and innovation. And I believe that civil society organizations can play a major role, in supporting the state, in supporting intergovernmental institutions, to think through what the nature of these innovations and knowledge and new knowledge has to be in a way that advances society. Finally, I would like to see a renewed commitment by well-established NGOs to hold the hands of and mentor younger and fledgling civil society organizations. We can no longer ignore them. The older and more established NGOs are in a best position or in a better position to support younger growing ones. I would like to see opportunities for them to help to build their capacity, to help them to think through what they are doing. And this is one of the things that I saw, in the conversation that I mentioned to you of the report of the study for the African Union. I see that newer NGOs, fledgling NGOs have a lot of needs that more established civil society organizations can help to fill. And I don't think that you should shy away from supporting and engaging them. And I think that development partners should actually put resources, into helping more established NGOs to support younger ones. After all, they are not just the future, but they're also the present. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give it a round of applause. I think just what I can just summarize there is that we cannot work in silos. Stakeholders and development partners are all guilty of the reversal, either shrinking, if we want to call it like that, we are witnessing today. And we've been fixated with and investing our time, our energy, and resources on these rituals and symbolism of democracy. And finally, that the contents, the substance, and the meaningfulness of it needs to be addressed. And one important thing, that a new commitment for mentoring by older NGOs to support the younger ones. Then also we should look for new orientation, like to co-create and then to co-implement. This time for comments and questions, we'll just online. Is there anyone online, please? So we can take. How many? Do we have time? How many time? I could say one, Media Foundation. And then 2, 3, 4, 5. That's fine. I've seen this. Okay. 6. Let's take it like 6 for now. Yes, I've already taken one here. Okay. 7. You 7. 8. No, make it short and simple.
Okay.
Please keep it short and simple.
Okay. So thank you very much, Chair. I just want to perhaps put you and Excellency Ambassador William on the spot a bit because of your previous work with ECOWAS, and for His Excellency also his role as a diplomat. in 2020, 2021, Guineans were defending democracy by protesting against the unconstitutional arrangements to change the constitution for a third term. They were being shot and killed. More than 100 of them died in the series of activities that they engaged in to defend democracy. Dr. Chair, I think at that time you were the Director of Political Affairs at ECOWAS. Now you are retired. I believe you can share your thoughts then. At the same time, subsequently, we saw similar things happening in Cote d'Ivoire with President Ouattara doing the same things. People were demonstrating, and I don't call that demonstrations. I call it acts to defend democracy, because democracy is about defending the constitution and the will of the people. In Togo, it happened, and then elsewhere it happened. But in all that, ECOWAS and you at that time were there, appeared not to have seen that people were acting in defense of democracy, until we saw President Alpha Conde sitting in a chair with a exposed singlet and some young military guy standing by him. And then within a matter of hours, we saw a statement from ECOWAS. Alpha Conde must be released. We condemn the coup. We want da. I want to know, what really is the problem that constrain institutions like ECOWAS? And now that you are not there, you can tell us the truth. And if we know the truth, we can work at it. What is the problem? Why is ECOWAS unable to always act in defense of the people, but rather always seem to be acting in defense of the heads of states?
This question, I guess I don't know who I'm going to address this to, but you talked about the three different players. So there's government, there's private sector, there's civil society. In terms of really protecting civic space, do you see a role for high network individuals to play in advancing philanthropy, in doing development work? Because they tend to be sort of forgotten, or at least, the work that they do does not address social rights, human rights issues. How can they be more involved in this process of protecting the space that we're in?
Je vais d'abord remercier les panélistes pour les bonnes interventions qu'ils ont eues. Bon, merci. Bon, le problème qui est revenu toujours à cœur, c'est aussi les questions de la société civile. Nous savons quand même que l'importance que jouent les organisations de la société civile dans l'espace CEDEAO. Mais le problème fondamental, c'est les moyens qu'il faut pour faire ce travail assez important. Et ça, je lance une pierre au niveau des partenaires techniques et financiers, surtout les organisations, les communautaires telles que la CEDEAO, l'Union africaine, et aussi peut-être parfois des organisations du Nord, et qui vraiment orientent la société civile vers des priorités pour leurs propres priorités. Maintenant, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire pour que nous, en tant qu'organisation de la société civile, qui connaissons bien les populations à la base, puissent avoir quand même leur propre initiative et soutenue par les partenaires techniques et financiers. Ça, c'est extrêmement important. Sans ça, vraiment, nous serons là à faire des programmes au profit d'autres personnes. Merci.
Thank you very much. Let me thank the panelists for a very deep conversation. And let me also say, I have not seen Ambassador Williams since 2016, when I organized workshop meeting in Abuja. Since then, I have not seen him. So it's a pleasure to see him, once again today. I want to say that let us not forget that despite the challenges of civil society organization in West Africa, they have played very key important role. Just, sometimes when there was a coup in Niger, civil society, the military junta then refused to see government, refused to see ECOWAS. But civil society, led by workshop, went and met with the military junta, and that was the beginning of the dialogue to restore constitutional order in that country. Secondly, civil society organization has been the only voices against tenure elongation in West Africa. Civil society organization has been the one that have been actually monitoring all the protocols that ECOWAS has in place. Without the effective engagement of civil society organization, even the free movement of goods and person in West Africa, it will have been difficult. We've been there physically, even in the various borders, trying to ensure and make sure that the protocol is actually enforced. Yes, it is true there are some challenges civil society are facing, and this is a reality. There's a serious decline of so many civil society organizations that have the capacity to engage the various states. But also from the ECOWAS itself, you could see that there's also decline in terms of strategic partnership with civil society organization. I remember many of the engagement that ECOWAS will do will have to have consultation or discussion with civil society. Today, that is not the case. The ECOWAS Parliament is there. Civil society used to observe the ECOWAS Parliament processes as well as Court of Justice, ECOWAS Court of Justice, session. Now, those things are not really happening. So there's need for the focal, country focal persons in, representing ECOWAS in their in-country to genuinely begin to engage civil society organization, because in country, you are expected as a representative of ECOWAS to also engage with the national civil society organization. This is not happening. In Nigeria, for example, Foreign Affairs is supposed to be responsible for that. You don't see anything like that happening for many years. Likewise to in many other countries. So when you look at the peace and security in the ECOWAS and the early warning department, it was civil society that makes it to be what it is today. So I think civil society have contributed in a lot. And if there's a genuine partnership, I believe they will do more. And therefore, for the development partners, they need to also begin to deliberately support civil society organization, because now most of the support goes to, for example, institutions like AU, ECOWAS, rather than supporting civil society organization. So all I want to say is that there's need for the development partners to also genuinely engage credible civil society organizations so that they can actually hold even the institutions accountable. Otherwise, it will be difficult for civil society to do the work because you need the resources. And if you don't have the resources to do that, it will be difficult to actually do the work. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a very quick comment, and then I have two questions, but very quick. I think the first one is that, because I've heard it so many times, that's the only reason I'm really bothering to. And it's this, what I call historical glorifications, this idea of always talking about looking back to Africa's past. As a way of, defining our future. History is important. We need to know what happened. But this idea that somehow that the solution lies in the past is in itself, a mirage. The past was not perfect, and that's why it changed. Monarchies are not the best forms of government, and we're talking about a democracy, but asking that we look back to monarchies and that monarchies should then become the model that we should be looking at going forward. The transatlantic, the trans-Saharan trade, yes, traded in goods, but it's also traded in people, and we continue to have that happening today, with the modern slavery happening through Libya and the rest of it. So I think it's important for us to look at history, but the reality is that we need to create the society we want today. It's either we're looking at history or we're looking to the West or looking to somewhere else. Can we actually just sit down and say, looking at the reality of Africa today, what kind of society do we need to forge? And do that mental exercise. So that's my comment. The question for me is, I actually wonder whether maybe the emphasis that part of the reason for the shrinking civil society space is because we have focused on democratic governance as opposed to building a democratic society, which is related but not the same thing. So for instance, as civil society, how many times have we when we go to build capacity, do we build the capacity, for instance, of the students' union to actually look at the issues of the university and look at how they can then become democratic and get the university where they're working, where they're schooling to become more democratic and accountable. The same thing with market people, as opposed to training them to try and hold government accountable, which is so much further away from them. How can we create a democratic society so that, the components of society can actually become democratic? And that's one of the challenges that we have, that we actually don't have a democratic society. People don't think democratically, even in families, try and challenge your father and see the beginning and the end of democracy right there. So we need to start thinking about civil society building democratic society, and your thoughts on that would be great. My other question is about funding, and I hear a lot about, looking towards development partners. And of course, that's what development partners want to do. But we also have to be careful, because on the one hand, we're asking the West to stay away. On the other hand, we're asking for their money to be able to do the work so that they can stay away. So we have to think about the contradictions in that. But more importantly, do movements actually thrive from external funding? We talk about, if we're going to build a democratic society, will it really happen with funding from external people? Or should we be looking at how do we galvanize our own resources to be able to create the resource, the funding we have? And if you look at the recent experiment in Nigeria, with the last elections, and how people, because they believed in a candidate, put in everything. They were not looking for money, they were not looking for anything, they just putting a lot. And that created a very organic, social movement that continues in whatever form to exist today. And so the question for me is that, has civil society really become lazy and, somehow almost like appendages of international development organizations, just waiting for funding to do something, waiting for funding to do that? How are we going to actually become, civil society and get all the different aspects of civil society, whether it is market women, whether it is trade unions, whether it is, medical associations or whatever, to really start looking at, how do we fund and bring in our resources into building a modern democratic society in which everyone will ultimately benefit? How do we create that kind of society and not the one that looks only to the MacArthurs and the Fords and the rest of it? Thank you. No, it was no. Yes, I did. It was her. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think Chichi sort of took some of the things that I wanted to say. And I don't know if I should continue, but let me say what I intended to say. So it was about history and the way that we tell stories around our history. We live in a culture that only encourages bravery and does not really encourage courage in the face of failure. So I understand the need for history and also the need to teach, maybe not teach, but pass on whatever experiences that we have gained in our political escapades in the future. But how about telling that story in a way that tells us where the potholes are? What mistakes shouldn't be repeated, rather than talk about the bravery of, like, if you hear my grandfather or my father, they talk about what they did during the war, how they fought the lions and the tigers, but nobody tells you the day that they were crying, what happened. And if you ever see that thing in your future, what should you do? I think that's the type of story that, or narrative, that we should actually be encouraging the younger generations to do. My second point is about inclusion. I think most of the speakers touched on the need for inclusion, but I also worry that even the diplomatic spaces is a bit a setup of gatekeeping, and it encourages very advanced, career developed
diplomats. Now, where is the place of that generational transfer, which will enable young people watch, emulate, look at you closely, and even make their own decisions on how things should work? My question is, what is the how? How do we do this, and how do we get to where we want to go? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to align my thought with what Ambassador Williams said about the fact that if we continue to generalize that the civic space is shrinking, it doesn't help us to see the other opportunities that exist for us to engage. Because if you look at various country contexts, you will realize that the shrinking of the civil space is not uniform and it is not universal. In some countries, whilst certain spaces are shrinking, there are other opportunities in other spaces that are also opening. And so when we generalize, it makes it very difficult for us to really see the opportunities that exist in other areas to engage. And beyond that, I think that as civil societies, we need to also align our programs and activities with the goals and protocols also at the regional level. For example, we have the ECPF, the ECOWAS Conflict Prevention Framework. How many of us align our activities to help in terms of domesticating the implementation of those frameworks at the national level? In various ECOWAS countries, we have the ECOWAS national offices. How many of us are engaging these offices in terms of dealing with regional issues? And so we need to begin to look at the opportunities that exist in order to effectively engage. Thank you.
Merci. Rapide. On parle d'élargir l'espace civique et comment élargir l'espace civique. Déjà, je pense que il nous faut prendre en compte ce dont je n'ai pas beaucoup entendu parler depuis hier, c'est ceux de la société civile qui travaillent dans le développement et surtout le développement à la base, ceux qui sont les porteurs de pas mal des OMD, le développement à la base, que ce soit l'agriculture, que ce soit l'éducation, l'accès à l'eau, etc., avec ces questions. Or, nous focalisons sur véritablement la société civile qui se focalise sur les questions de gouvernance, d'accès au pouvoir et de gestion du pouvoir, qui sont extrêmement importants, mais nous laissons de côté une grande partie de la société civile que nous devons absolument inclure et donc élargir notre perspective et nos travaux à ces gens-là qui se trouvent être très proches de la majorité de la population et donc des ruraux. Ça, c'est un premier point important en termes d'élargissement de l'espace civique. Un deuxième secteur d'acteurs importants, ce sont les radios communautaires. Quand on parle des médias, de la liberté d'expression, du droit à la communication, il est extrêmement important de les inclure et ne pas nous limiter à ces médias mainstream ou aux médias sociaux dont nous avons beaucoup parlé et d'ignorer les radios communautaires. Pour un tas de raisons. Premièrement, parce qu'ils sont les voix des communautés, qu'ils sont ceux qui parlent véritablement les langues et les langages de toutes les communautés urbaines et rurales, et qu'ils sont ceux qui ont la capacité, les moyens de mobiliser les communautés pour tout ce travail que l'on veut engager. Et je voudrais donner une illustration de pourquoi il est aussi stratégique d'inclure les radios communautaires. Au Sénégal, il se passe quelque chose d'absolument terrible depuis des années. C'est que les lois qui régissent le secteur des radios communautaires, nous avons quelques 200 radios communautaires qui couvrent tout le territoire qui va et qui font un travail extraordinaire. Et la loi qui les régit dit, alors entre guillemets, qu'ils n'ont pas le droit de faire de la politique. Alors c'est assez amusant si ce n'était pas triste, parce qu'ils font de la politique tous les jours en s'occupant des conditions de vie des communautés, des villageois, et de leurs droits fondamentaux. Et entre deux élections, pendant 5 ans, on les laisse faire ce travail-là, et ils le font très concrètement avec 0 moyen. Et dès qu'approche une élection, on ressort la loi et on trouve le moyen d'enfermer. Et on ferme leur antenne. Donc, il y a quelque chose à voir là. Et je termine en disant que, et reprenant le point que Monsieur Abani a abordé, la question, le besoin de revisiter ou définir le concept d'espace civique. Absolument. Et j'irai même un peu plus loin. Je dirais qu'on a vraiment besoin de définir et vulgariser les définitions de l'espace public d'abord. Il y a un vrai problème culturel de partage de cette compréhension de ce qu'est l'espace public. Et il y a tellement de citoyens, encore une fois, qui sont loin des espaces que nous connaissons, dans lesquels nous brassons des idées, qui ne savent pas en fait ce qu'est cet espace public et est-ce qu'ils y ont droit, à quel point et à quel niveau ils ont le droit d'accéder. Oui, il y a la question de la liberté d'expression qui en fait partie. Oui, il y a les droits de manifester, mais ça va au point que quand on entend des gens qui viennent des villages et qui disent, je termine, et qui disent, est-ce que j'ai le droit, moi, venant de mon village, d'aller dans un hôpital public? Il y a un problème de compréhension. Et c'est là que quand on parle de culture, revisiter notre passé, c'est pas de glorifier tant les choses que, plutôt que de savoir, en fait, quels sont les concepts, les cultures fondamentales. Oui, monsieur, je termine. Qui sont les concepts des droits des citoyens et des communautés. Et c'est vraiment de comprendre d'où nous partons et avant de pouvoir engager un grand dialogue national où que nous soyons. Merci.
Merci. I think we've exhausted our time, but it's also good for the panelists. 1 minute, please. A minute, please. The one specifically said. Charles, let's take it.
Thank you very much. 1 minute. Brahma, I sense your frustration. I used to do this thing. I try to anticipate what ECOWAS and EU will say by writing a draft of, I didn't tell you this, by writing a draft of their response when issues happen. And more often than not, I am 95% right in terms of what ECOWAS will say. I can write for you today what ECOWAS is going to say about the coup in Gabon. Yeah. So, I mean, we know this. So for me, it's important that ECOWAS should maintain fidelity to its commitment to be ECOWAS of the people, to make that transition of ECOWAS of government to ECOWAS of people. How it does that's a different thing, because ECOWAS, after all, is an intergovernmental institution and it's a club of heads of states, that basically want to protect themselves, otherwise, how do you explain why all the realities, all the vital signs are very obvious in every single one of, including this one where we live, that things are not right and everybody's pretending as if they are. I want to say something also about CSOs, especially CSOs that youth-led CSOs. One of the things I discovered in the report that we did was that the first 5 years in the lifespan of a CSO is very important because the mortality rate of CSOs is very high, within the first 5 years. And that's why we see a lot of young CSOs led by young people, dying and waking, Dakudaji and all the rest. And this is why I'm bringing back the point about the need for established CSOs to provide the kind of support that they require so that they can grow. Young CSOs don't care about bureaucracy. They behave more like molecules in networks. So we must appreciate that peculiarity and see how we can support them, rather than expect them to transform into bureaucracies with offices, staff, and so on and so forth. And I see finally, increasingly, and I hope I'm sure you can reflect on this, a lot of young CSOs or a lot of professionals are becoming more and more involved, beyond their 8 to 5 o'clock jobs. People are becoming more and more interested in asking questions, what can I do? Because professionals are beginning to find new meaning, beyond the work that they do, that they probably earn so much money. They are finding new meanings, in spaces where they can volunteer. We can leverage this. There's a whole lot that civil society can do. Money is necessary, but not sufficient in order to do them. And we should try to leverage them and to advance those. Thank you.
Many thanks for your very excellent interventions. I wish we had a bit more time, but I would like to put on the table the fact that civil society as players within the civic space is not only heterogeneous, it's also very fluid. we're not just one space called civil society. People cross in and out into government, into private sector. And so as we think about the relationships, we also need to think about the kinds of values that we can enable as we cross the spaces. For example, I would like to see more of us take greater interest in politics, because we stand by and we do the observation alone and we think that is enough, but we're not paying close attention to the kind of people who represent us. This continues to matter in terms of the strategic role for civil society. And civil society will always have two roles. I've had that tension and that struggle, and the question has been asked, should we be focused only on analysis, or should we also focus on needs of the people, like my sister was talking about rural organizations? I think we need to tread that space between the strategic needs as well as the basic needs. But recognizing that for the kinds of organizations in this room, we're probably more effective when we are doing the thinking and the supporting, and we are ourselves decolonizing wealth. And what do I mean by decolonizing wealth? Enabling community-based organizations, which we really haven't talked about in this room, do more of the living, because it is their lives, they're the ones on the bottom, and we serving more as the catalyst. And I know there's a panel later that's going to be talking about that. The final thing I'd like to say is that democracy is not an on and off thing. It's not a necessary in this space, necessary in that space thing. It's all encompassing. So when we say democracy matters, I will agree with my sister, Chichi, that it's not just about the government, it's about the nature of the spaces that we create. And it's not either or, because those who go into government are coming from this civic space, crossing into government. Those who are students in schools are also learning to be leaders. That is part of what the curriculum, at least in an ideal space, is supposed to be talking about. So wherever our work takes us, and we're all working in different spaces, and I think that's probably a strength, we should continue to ask ourselves, what's the nature of this space? Because it continues to change. And the point has been made about the way in which we need to pay attention to the dynamics of power within our organizations before we can pay attention to the dynamics of power on the external. And I think it continues a kind of balance to say that we're going to need to think about local philanthropy and beginning to look at wealth within our spaces. It's very important. But I think there's a continued role for donors like Ford and MacArthur. And I know my sister Chichi had asked the question, is civil society lazy? I wear my hat as a donor and as a civil society. I say civil society is not lazy. Civil society is becoming overwhelmed. And civil society is at a point where we development partners need to help with a pause and reflect, to reset the priorities, to set the agenda, to understand what is the most strategic role of civil society at this inflection moment for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me start from the last questions which related to African history. It's actually about African history and cultural heritage. The two go together. And I want to reiterate that the reason why we are sitting here lamenting about our countries, about our regions, and about the continent is because we haven't gotten our history and cultural heritage in terms of educational content and pedagogy right. Because you cannot build the nation and state, national cohesion, without knowing your history and allowing others to determine for you the narrative of your history. That is subversive, and even more subversive that the middle class and elite of today that I belong to, in terms of generation, we are a problem unto our founding fathers and unto the youth, because we should get it right. Our history and teaching is not right. That is why also the Oba of Benin, at his coronation, which I had the privilege of attending, he too added his voice at that time that the teaching of history should be brought back. 2, Ubuntu and the Bible. In the Bible, it is written that, according to those who wrote it, I'm a Christian, by the way, so get me right, that go out there and conquer. Africa says Ubuntu, not to go out there and conquer. Because of that philosophy, others came and conquered our ancient Egypt. And that previous history of the African civilization, which is the mother of all civilizations, has been turned upside down and has to be corrected. And thank God, thanks to the digital revolution, our youth are getting it right. We have gotten it wrong. Thank God we will pass. We'll be irrelevant and the youth are going to take over. So my response is that, please, come to think of it, STEM education that we are promoting now, useful, but by itself alone, dangerous. You train people and you'll be training them for somebody else. They will develop the skills and they will go elsewhere. They will not look inside here. But if you add history and your cultural heritage, then you are gone and good to go. So please, let us prioritize it in the CSOs and in our states. Our correct history and cultural heritage, we need to address it. And thank God the African Americans are the ones who are thirstier and are doing more research, which is coming back home to drive us. So I thought I should make that clear. Number two, there's this issue about Guinea. My brother Sule was the one who was talking about Guinea and all that. Let me just, because of time, let me just say this, that one, in the Rex and in the continent, we are doing what I call part-time integration. And because we are doing part-time integration, we are not doing integration. The Europeans decided to do full-time integration, and they are our partners. How are you going to compete with them? I will leave it at that. Leadership. When leadership is not consistent, both within the public sector and non-state sector, then we have a problem. So today you have ECOWAS taking progressive steps. Tomorrow you have retrogressive steps. There has to be consistency. There was also the issue of somebody asked this question that I thought I should respond to. I'm trying to see references. Yeah, he said AU and Rex should help to reorient CSOs towards our priorities. I think it's the other way around. CSO work should begin in the member states, influencing policy outcomes in the member state, because the member states go to represent you in ECOWAS, go to represent you at the AU. So if you prioritize the national level and influence policies which are taken by our state actors, you are already gone. What I've noticed is that at the level of ECOWAS, at the level of AU, some of our brethren, the CSOs, are complaining about not being involved. Please start at the national level. There is what you call the ECOWAS National Office. In each of our member states, invariably it is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Are you satisfied that a foreign ministry has the capacity to interface with the local level in our countries and represent your interests at ECOWAS? That the foreign ministry will do the same at the AU? In the wisdom of our leaders, what they did was that when they identified focal points, the national office, they also said, have a national committee for integration, multi-stakeholder.
I think we need to wind up, please.
So let me conclude this one. And, recently, ECOWAS tried to review that. In all our countries, the National Committee for Integration is not functional. That is where CSO begins, because CSO has a role there. There's, what do you call it? TUCs, our chambers of commerce, media are all in that law. It's not functioning. So please start from there. Sorry for that.
I think, okay, Just has already even rounded up earlier. But you might want to go.
Are you going to give me a chance to say something?
Well, EU.
The European Union representative, please, can we have your final remarks?
Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's Ruben again. I have followed with a lot of interest all of the exchanges and the views. I think indeed what I take home today, well, I'm sitting at home, so what I take home literally today is that definitely we need to continue pushing to open spaces for civil society so they can as I said at the beginning, continue expressing the needs and the grievances of the citizens in the region, and also to opening a space for civil society to be able to be part of a dialogue, to be part of the kind of society, the kind of democracy that each country wants to build, because there's no one size fits all. And what I wanted to say is that, of course, the European Union will continue supporting and dedicating resources, putting the money where our mouth is, to accompany in that process, to try to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think that's what I would really like to emphasize in this final remarks. So thank you very much once again for the invitation, and very much looking forward to being able to engage with you further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Yes, thanks. Let's give a round of applause to the speakers.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair and our panelists. Please, we just take a group